So it's a form of expropriation without compensation, but not the sort that we tend to talk about in South Africa when we're talking about sort of like land policy. It's much more subtle than that.
Are we seeing a breakdown in confidence in public institutions? Well, Bronwyn Williams, who's a futurist and economist with Flux Trends, believes that there are some early warning signs of a breakdown in public confidence in the state and also the institutions of the global economy. Bronwyn joins us today. Bronwyn, what do you think are those warning signs exactly?
I think the first thing to really look at is that the social contract at large in the Western world that is premised on a nation state, on some form of democracy, and on some sort of a trade-off, essentially. So we pay taxes as effectively protection money, and in exchange, we get some protection from the state. And that protection is not just law and order, it's also often and increasingly in the Western world, some sort of welfare endowments too, or entitlements that we're then able to have, whether that's social security or national health insurance, depending on which country you live in. And that is, of course, premised on the fact that people are both contributing and benefiting from these things. What we're starting to see is that whole system is being really undermined by the fact that powerful entities, whether they be from the world of money or from the house of power, are essentially sort of changing the rules of the game mid-play. It's probably the easiest sort of metaphor to understand what's going on. And I think one of the easiest examples that we can use to talk to this sort of breaking down of the trust and undermining of the contract that we've all sort of signed up to in democracy in the nation state is what's happening with sort of backdoor taxation, in other words, inflation, and how that is increasingly being used essentially is almost a sort of underhanded way to expropriate private wealth, but without compensation. So it's a form of expropriation without compensation, but not the sort that we tend to talk about in South Africa when we're talking about sort of like land policy. It's much more subtle than that. But it is quite insidious in that it really is facilitating a transfer, an unnegotiated transfer of wealth from the private sector to the public sector. And not only that, also to particular hands within the system, whether they be central banks or people closest to that sort of financial teat, however you want to put it. What we're really seeing is that these systems are not working the way that they were advertised. And what's quite concerning is that it almost feels like what's happening has not been done open-handedly. So a normal sort of tax would be out in the open. We understand what the tax code is, what the rate is that we're going to be paying. When you start talking about things like inflation and changing the money supply and changing how money is put into the systems, but it's not explained to everyone, and it's also sort of applied behind the door rather than explicitly, it's sort of implicit. That obviously starts to undermine trust. But that's just one of many, many examples we're seeing where institutions are essentially failing the people that are paying to support them. So institutions are breaking their side of the deal, whereas citizens and consumers and shareholders are still expected to uphold their side of the bargain.
So Bronwyn, you've identified both social and economic trends at play. What do you think are going to be the consequences in each of these realms, both society and the economy?
Well, I have to say that I can probably answer both those parts kind of together, because the key thing that we really experience here is a breakdown in credibility. And we understand that breakdown in credibility affects both the economy and society in a feedback loop type measure. And what we're really seeing across society, all of our biggest problems can boil down to this lack of trust in the system. If people are unable to trust the system, whether that's the rules of the economy or each other, just each other in the street or in society, we're unable to build and to plan. And it's quite interesting to sort of look at it, sort of wearing my sort of futurist hat, to talk about how societies that have the luxury of more foresight, in other words, have the luxury of more stable economic policy, greater trust in the rules that underpin their social contract, are able to plan ahead, and this becomes a huge source of competitive advantage. So that's the one reason why credibility in any sort of monetary and social system is so essential. The other one, of course, is that credibility, particularly in monetary systems and economic systems, are self-fulfilling prophecies. This is why you've got things like in the long run, money is neutral and all of those sorts of things. When it comes to messing around with economies and changing the rules, when you undermine that credibility, the gains you get from being able to apply directed monetary policy and fiscal policy to actually help economies during times of crisis gets diluted, because if people don't believe what is being put out by central banks, by governments, is going to come to pass, they act as if even if it does happen, it's not going to happen the way that it's been planned. And that's really the issue. It's this whole thing of credibility. You can't get real growth. You can't really plan. You can't really build. You can't really invest without an understanding of what's going to happen in the future. Now, this is where it gets a bit weird, because even if we expect bad things to happen and bad things do happen, people are still able to make plans. But when people are promised good things, but bad things keep happening, whether that's politicians that keep lying to us or central banks that keep changing money supply ad hoc, seemingly by the seat of their pants, that's when we're unable to plan. And any sort of investor or any sort of business person that wants to invest in a country, that wants to invest in a company, that wants to build something, needs to understand the rules and the risks of the future that they are building into. And that's what's so insidiously disappointing and so untrustworthy about what we're seeing and about how important that social contract is. Because without an understanding of rules that are going to be consistent for a longer time into the future, people are simply not prepared to take risks. And if people aren't prepared to take risks and to build things, that becomes once again a self-defeating vicious cycle whereby less investment is made into your economies. And then, of course, expectations lower even further, and on it goes. So that's why we're in quite dangerous times when trust falls out of a society. It's very, very difficult to get that back. As I like to say, when it comes to trust, whether that's trust in politicians or trust in central bankers or trust in each other, it's much easier to maintain trust than it is to rebuild it once it's been broken, as anyone who's ever been cheated on in a relationship will be very quick to tell you.
Well, thanks very much, Bronwyn. We'll certainly have you back on the channel soon to discuss these and other topics in more detail. My name is David Ansara. This is the Center for Risk Analysis. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel, and also check out the link in the description below to our 30-day free trial where you can access all of our content. Until next time, take care.